Hi, I'm Becki from Minerva and welcome to today's video. So this video is going to be a sew along for the dress that I'm wearing now. So this is the McCall's 7946 pattern and as you can see it is a pattern for a really lovely floaty spring dress with an elasticated bodice, puffy sleeves and a ruffle on the bottom. I'll put some images of the final dress here and there'll be some shots of it at the end as well. So this video is going to take you all the way through from the very beginning all the way through the sewing process for this dress. So if you are new to sewing or you've never sewn this pattern before, hopefully this video will be really helpful for you. I'll also be showing you all the products that you need to make your own version of this and they're all available on our website, so you'll be able to just order what you need to make this lovely dress. So without further ado, let's get sewing! So here are all the notions you'll need to complete this project, and we'll start by taking a closer look at the pattern envelope itself. So the first thing to note on the front of the packet is that it is available in two different size options. The AX5 goes from the size 4 to 12 and the D5 goes from size 12 to 20. Taking a look now at the back of the envelope, and the first thing we can take a closer look at is those sizes. So this is available from a size 4 through to a size 20. The 4 is a 29.5-inch bust, a 22-inch waist and a 31.5-inch hip, and the 20 is a 42-inch bust, a 34-inch waist and a 44-inch hip. We can also take a look at those line drawings for the 4 different views available in this pattern. For reference, I'm going to be making a size 12 in view C. Inside the envelope, as well as your paper pattern pieces, which I have already taken out and cut up in my size and will show you shortly, you'll also find 2 large pieces of paper, which when you fold out contain all of the instructions needed to cut out and assemble this project. Popping the pattern to one side for a minute, we'll take a look at everything else we need to complete this project. I also have a Minerva Maker sewing label, some Gutermann Sew-All polyester thread in the shade 169, some hemline general braided elastic, and some bias binding in a colour that coordinates with my fabric. Next, let's take a look at the fabric I've chosen for this project. This fabric is our Minerva Exclusive Viscose Challis fabric in the print Scattered Fronds. So this is a 100% viscose fabric and it's super lightweight with some lovely drape and movement to it, which you can see here. View C, you'll need to cut piece 1 on the fold, this is your dress front, piece 2 also on the fold, this is your dress back, 2 of piece 3, these will be your sleeves, and then 2 of piece 10 also on the fold, and these will be sewn together to make your ruffle. One hint is to, instead of cutting this pattern piece fully, is to fold it in half for this view along this line here. That means that you can reuse this piece again in the future if you want to make the view with the longer ruffle attached at the bottom. You'll also need elastic guides 4, 6, 8 and 9. We're going to cut these in the size for our elastic, but I'm going to do this as I go to make sure I'm using the right piece of elastic at the right time. So once all the pattern pieces are cut out and all your markings are transferred to your fabric, we'll start by taking piece 1, the dress front, and folding that out right side up, so the right side is facing us on our table. And then we're going to match that right sides together with piece 2, the dress back. So we'll take piece 2 and pop that one right side down on top of piece 1, and we're going to be matching up the side seams at both sides. Once you've got those side seams matched up, pin in place. Then stitch those side seams in place using a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, remembering to backstitch at both ends. So once you've finished those seams in your preferred method, I've used my overlocker, and you've pressed them open, you're going to reinforce those seams at the casing area to make it easier to insert the elastic later on. To do this, put the stitch length up on your machine as far as it will go. On my machine that's 5mm, and stitch about 15 centimeters of the seam in place at the casing area. So that's where you've got the markings for the casings to be placed on your bodice. Stitch about 15 centimeters of the seam allowance in place on both sides. Next, to form the waist casings that the elastic will be inserted into for the bodice, you're going to start at the side seam that you just reinforced and pin the bias tape so it's wrong sides together, so the wrong side of the bias tape is facing the wrong side of the fabric, and pin it in place so that the bottom of the bias tape is level with the placement line you have marked on your fabric. So I found that this job took quite a lot of time, so just go slowly, go carefully. The slower you do it, the chances are you'll only have to do it the one time, and just readjust as you go. So if you need to unpin and repin, that's fine, take your time. Pin it in place all the way around the bodice of the dress, and pin as close to that bottom line as you can, because this will make the sewing easier. Once you're happy with the top one, then just work your way down until you've pinned all 3 in place. And another tip I would give is just maybe give yourself a bit extra bias binding. You're going to be lapping the ends at the side seam anyway, so you can always cut a bit off if you need to. So give yourself a bit of grace with the bias tape as well, because you can always cut some off later. Once you're happy that you've got all 3 of those casings pinned in place, it should look something like this. And the next step is going to be to stitch these in place along the very bottom of the bias tape and then along the very top, as close to the edge of the bias tape as you can get it. Again, I would do this really slowly and really carefully, so turn the speed on your machine down and just go really slowly so that you can get that stitching line as close to the edge of the bias tape on both the top and the bottom as you can. This is what that will look like when it's finished. So all 3 casings are sewn in place, and where the bias binding meets at the side seam, just leave that loose and overlapping for now, because we will sew the 2 ends together, sew them shut once the elastic is inserted. Putting the main body of the dress to one side for now, we're going to move on to the sleeves. The first step is to reinforce the corners of the sleeves by stitching down towards where you have the marking, pivoting at that point, and then stitching along the other side. So stitch down in a straight line towards where you have the marking in the corner. And when you get to that marking, leave your needle in, leave your presser foot up, pivot your fabric, put the presser foot back down, and then continue to stitch in a straight line. Repeat this process so that you've done both of the corners on both of the sleeves. Then make a small clip in each corner, but be careful not to cut through your stitching. Next, measure out a piece of bias binding so that it's the same length as the head of the sleeve. Then, using an iron, open out one of the folded edges of the bias tape. Then, with right sides together between the 2 clips that you made earlier, pin the bias binding in place so that the crease on the opened out edge is along the 5/8 of an inch seam line. Trim and turn in the ends at both ends of the bias binding. Stitch in place along the opened out crease of the bias binding. Trim the fabric so that the edge of the fabric is in line with the edge of the bias tape. Then fold and turn the bias tape towards the wrong side of the fabric, so it will be on the inside of the finished garment, and use an iron to press that in place. stitch that in place all along the lower edge of the bias binding, again as close to that edge as you can get your stitching. Grab 2 safety pins as we're going to be inserting the elastic into the top of the sleeve. You need guide for elastic number 4, and the first step is to cut a piece of elastic to this length. Then take one of your safety pins and pin it to one end of the elastic. And then pin this in place next to the opening on one side of your sleeve. Then take the other safety pin and attach this to the other end of the elastic. And then use this safety pin to thread the elastic all the way through the casing. Now again, this job takes quite a long time and can be quite fiddly. It is quite a small casing that we've made, so just take your time. You might want to put something nice on the telly or listen to some music or a podcast. I recommend getting a nice cup of tea or something and just thread that elastic all the way through the casing at the top of the sleeve. And there we have our nicely gathered in sleeve head. Once you've got your elastic threaded all the way through, pin it in place at both ends. And secure the elastic in place by stitching back and forth a few times on both ends. Lastly, trim off any excess elastic just to remove bulk. Next, fold your sleeve in half, right sides together, and pin and stitch in place using a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Finish the seam in your preferred method and press it open, and then reinforce about 1.5 inches either side of the casing area by basting it in place. Then, to hem the sleeve, turn the bottom edge up by about 1.5 centimetres, wrong sides together, and press in place. Then open out your pressed edge and turn it in again so that the raw edge of the fabric is sitting along the crease that you just made. Now press this new fold in place. Turn the hem in once more along the crease and press in place again. And now we're ready to stitch this hem in place close to the inner edge of the hem fold we've just made. So that's our hem done, and the sleeve is really coming together now. Now we're just going to form the elastic casing towards the bottom of the sleeve, and to do this we're going to follow the same steps we did to make the elastic casings on the bodice. So I've measured out a piece of bias binding to the right length, and I'm pinning it in place so that the bottom of the bias binding is along the placement line that I've got marked on the sleeve. So now I'm going to take this over to my machine and I'm going to stitch it in place along both edges of the bias binding. side for elastic number 6 and cut a piece of elastic to this size. And then to insert the elastic, I'm going to use the 2 safety pins the same way that we did before to insert the elastic into the head of the sleeve. So pin 1 in place at the seam opening where the casing is, and then use the other safety pin to guide the elastic through. Once the elastic's threaded all the way through, take this over to your machine, lap the 2 ends of the elastic together and stitch them together. Finally, to close the elastic casing, using a hand sewing needle and thread, you're just going to slip stitch the 2 open edges of the casing together. Repeat all of these steps for sleeve number 2 and you will have 2 beautiful puffy sleeves. Once you've sewn both your sleeves, we're now going to attach them to the bodice. To do this, take each sleeve and with right sides together, pin it in place at the armhole edge. Turn the stitch length up as high as it will go on your machine and baste each sleeve in place. To form the upper casing on the bodice, you're going to measure out a piece of bias binding so that it's the same length as the whole upper edge of the bodice. Then, using an iron, open out one of the creases of the bias binding. Next, pin this bias binding in place along the whole upper edge of your bodice so that the crease you just opened out is equal to where the 5/8 of an inch seam allowance will be on the upper edge of the bodice. stitch in place along the crease. Then trim the seam allowance all around the top edge of the bodice so that it sits even with the bias binding. Now we're going to turn the bias binding towards the inside, so to the wrong side of the dress, in just the same way that we did with the head of the sleeve, and press that in place. Stitch in place close to the edge of the bias binding. So now that you've finished making the casing all along the top of the bodice, we need to insert the elastic into it. So this time we're going to need guide for elastic number 8, so find that and cut a piece of elastic to this size. Using your 2 safety pins in the exact same way we inserted the elastic into the sleeve, go ahead and insert the elastic into the casing at the top of the bodice. When your elastic's all the way through, go ahead and just secure the 2 ends of the elastic together with a safety pin for now. This is just so that we can check that we're happy with the fit before we commit and stitch it in place. Now we're going to repeat these steps to insert the elastic into the 3 elastic channels we made earlier. So go ahead and find guide for elastic number 9 and cut 3 pieces of elastic to this length. Then, using the same technique with the 2 safety pins, insert the elastic into all 3 of these channels. This is going to take quite a long time, it's quite a fiddly job, so make sure you've got a cup of tea and a good TV show or podcast on the go while you're doing this. When you finish this, you'll be able to see that the dress is really starting to come together and looking really beautiful. At this point, go and try the dress on and make sure you're happy with the fit around the bodice before you stitch any of the elastic together. Make any adjustments that you want to make, and then come back for the next step. Once you are happy with the fit, take the dress over to your machine and stitch the ends of the elastic together. Then finish the casings in the same way we did before, so using a hand sewing needle and thread, slip stitch the casings closed. At this stage, I'm also going to stitch my lovely Minerva Maker sewing label into the back of the dress. So I'm going to fold the back together to find the middle. And I'm going to mark this with a pin. And then I'm going to pin and stitch the label in place. Finally, we're on to the hem and ruffle at the bottom of the dress. To hem the bottom of the dress itself, we're going to repeat the steps we did to hem the sleeve, starting with folding the hem up by 1.5 centimeters and pressing in place. Next, unfold this and then press it again so that the raw edge is in line with the crease that we just made. Then fold this again along the crease and then press and stitch in place. take your 2 ruffle pieces, which is pattern piece number 10, and pin and stitch them together along the 2 short edges with right sides together. Finish the seams in your preferred method and press them open. To hem the top edge of the ruffle, create a line of stitching about 1/2 inch from the raw edge. Here you can see the line of stitching we just made. So what you're going to do next is turn the piece in, wrong sides together, so that stitching just sits on the inside, and then press that in place. Trim the seam allowance very close to the stitching. Then turn this edge in again where you've just trimmed it and press and stitch in place. To hem the lower edge of the ruffle, repeat the steps we used to hem the sleeve and the dress itself, starting by turning the edge up by 1.5 centimeters and pressing in place. Then unfold the edge and press it again so that the raw edge sits along the crease. Then fold once more along the crease, press and stitch in place. Next, turn the stitch length up again on your machine as long as it will go, and then create a line of gathering stitches along the top edge of the ruffle piece. Remember, don't back tack at each end of this line of stitching because we need to be able to pull and gather them together. Now, with right sides up, you're going to match the side seam of the ruffle piece with the side seam of the dress and pin in place along the placement line that you should have marked on the dress piece. Once you've got that pin in place, take one of your gathering threads, which you should have left nice and long, and using a figure of 8 motion, wind it around the pin that you just used to pin the two pieces together. With that secured in place, find your other gathering thread and start to gently pull on it to gather the ruffle so that it's the same circumference, the same length as the bottom of your dress. Once you've started to gather the ruffle up, you'll be able to match the side seam on the other side together, and this will just help you to divide your ruffle into halves, so then you can focus on gathering up the front half so that you've got nice even gathers all along the front of your dress, and then you can flip over and do the same on the back. As you can see, it really is just the process of keeping going, pulling the thread, spreading the ruffles out, and repeating this until you're happy and that you've got nice even gathers all around your dress. If, like me, you then want to get very specific about your gathers being even all around your dress, you can then go through the process of finding the centre front of the dress and the centre front of the ruffle and marking these both with pins. And once you've got the centre front of the dress pinned to the centre front of the ruffle, you can really work in quarters, make sure you're happy with the gather distribution, and then at this point you can pin the bottom of the dress to the top of the ruffle and start getting this pinned in place. You'll then want to repeat those steps on the back as well, so find the centre back of both the dress and the ruffle, match them up, and then get the rest all pinned in place. At this point, I also decided I wanted to put my dress on my dress form so I could check the ruffle and how the gathers were distributed with it hanging. I'm glad I did this because it allowed me to see that my gathers were very gathered up in some places and quite flat in others. So I just took my time and redistributed them so they were a lot more even all around the bottom of the dress. Once you're happy with how your ruffle looks and that you've got your gathers all beautifully distributed, then stitch the ruffle in place onto the dress along the ruffle placement line. And here is the finished dress. So much for watching today. I really hope that you enjoyed this video and found it really helpful if you are going to make your own version of this dress. I have to say I love mine. It's super comfortable, and who doesn't love a dress that's both really comfortable and really pretty? So perfect for spring summer. I'm definitely going to be making more versions of this. As always, if you do make your own version of this dress, please do go over and create a profile on Minerva and share your photos and videos with us because we love to see what you guys are making at home. Thank you so much for watching. Have a lovely day and we'll see you next time. Bye!